today I would like to talk about three things that are very important for me, particularly as a Delta trainer. That is receptive skills lessons, reading and listening, learner progress, and particularly evaluating learner progress. These are the three things that Delta Module 2 candidates tend to struggle most with. And I hope that in my session today, we're going to look at some ways in which you can address that, whether you're going to take the Delta moving forward or in your reading and listening lessons. We're going to start with a little bit of a vibe check. And my question to you is, how are you feeling today? You have four options. Are you feeling a bit tired because it's late, it's Thursday, we still have one more day before the weekend? Are you feeling a bit confused, like what are you doing? Is this webinar really for me? Or are you curious as to what you can learn moving forward? Or are you excited about the insights that you may gain at the end of this session? So I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Please use the chat box and tell me, how are you feeling today? So you may wonder why I've asked you this question, and it's actually very important because these are some of the emotions that our students go through when it comes to comprehending spoken or written text. The students who are good readers and good listeners, who have developed strategies and have a level of automaticity in terms of using their top-down processing skills and their bottom-up processing skills, tend to be curious and excited in our reading or listening lessons. But students who struggle with comprehension tend to be either tired or confused. The reason for that is because reading and listening involve cognitive processes that take up a good deal of our working memory. On training courses like the CELTA, we train teachers to foster curiosity and engagement with the text. So we train our teachers to be on the third step on our ladder of feelings. We want our students to be curious about the text that they're going to read or listen. However, on the Delta, we take a step further and we train teachers to help students develop strategies and become more aware of what they are doing that makes them excited in comprehending a text, in having a sense of achievement that they have understood either a listening text or a reading text. My plan for today is I'm going to take you a little bit on a journey. The one thing that's very important in order for us to identify what our students struggle with is to reflect on our own strategies and our own listening and reading abilities. So this is what I'm going to do today. I'm going to take you on a journey that starts with reflecting on your own use of reading strategies as users of the language, as proficient users of the language. Then we're going to be looking at how to activate and make use of prior knowledge. I know that there is a lot of literature and there's a lot of chatter about activating student schemata or prior knowledge, but there is an extra step, which is making use of that prior knowledge. And finally, we are going to be focusing explicitly on strategies in a Delta lesson. And Cambridge is always very clear about this. It's not enough to get our students to read or listen. We must focus explicitly on strategies and help them understand the processes that happen when they decode reading and listening. As promised, the first step is going to be on a reflection of your own strategies, own reading strategies. For this task, you're going to need pen and paper. I have for you here a list of 5 commonly used reading strategies. And we have setting goals before reading, reviewing whether we have achieved our goals, asking ourselves if we know what we know about the topic before reading, asking ourselves if we understand the text as we read, and asking ourselves questions about the text as we read. These strategies are formulated in statements that have several degrees of frequency. So for example, I always, often, sometimes, never set goals before reading. I'm going to invite you to take about 1 or 2 minutes and choose the most appropriate adverb of frequency in each statement. Do you always, do you often, do you sometimes, do you never set goals before reading? Write these down on a piece of paper, and we're going to revise your answers at the end of this session. So take a moment to reflect on your own reading strategies. Thank you very much for doing that. I'm not going to ask you for your answers now, but you are going to revise this at the end as well and see possibly the difference between how we as proficient readers think about strategies and how our students do. Okay. So now that we have reflected on it, let's have a go at the next part. The next step in our journey was about fostering curiosity. So in order to do that, I have selected a text about listening. The title of the text is Making Listening an Authentic Experience. But before I share with you the text, I would like you to answer these 2 questions. What do you know about this topic? What do you know about making listening an authentic experience? And what do you want to know about this topic? What do you want to know about making listening an authentic experience? I look forward to your answers in the chat box. Now, this is the text that I promised. This is an extract from Nick Peachy's article on making listening an authentic experience. Nick Peachy is a teacher trainer who specializes in authentic experiences using the internet and technology to assist students in their lessons. This is only an extract from a bigger article, but what I would like you to do is take a moment to read it and write in the chat box the number corresponding to your reaction to the information presented here. Is this something that you agree with? Is this something that you disagree with? Is this something that you don't understand fully? Is this something that you want or need more information about? Or number 5, this is all very surprising. So take 1 minute to read the extract and share in the chat box the number corresponding to your reaction. Excellent. Although it seems that it's quite an obvious thing that we want to make listening a more authentic experience, it's often the logistics of it that escape us, and often the course books, as Nick says in his article, are very formulaic in their approach to listening tasks, which is basically focused a lot on testing and answering comprehension questions, getting the right answer. The measurement for development of listening is basically if the students have answered correctly, and we know that that is not always the case. Now, for those of you who do want to learn more about this, I have the QR code, and you can read the rest of the article there. Also, if you type into Google Nick Peachy making listening an authentic experience, you'll be able to see the article there. Remember at the beginning of this task, you set yourself some goals. I introduced to you the title of the text, and you asked some questions about it. You wanted to know more about it. Again, let's reflect a little bit. What did you learn from this extract? You can make a note on a piece of paper, or you can share it in the chat box. What is one thing that you learned? Were any of your questions answered? very nice answer from Julia. She says, I got answers, but also a different perspective on listening. And yes, in terms of developing receptive skills, the trends in terms of methodology and research currently focus on turning listening and reading into more authentic experiences. Historically, in terms of teaching reading and listening, we have gone through a series of debates. One debate was, reading and listening have been taught very similarly, and traditionally they had followed the same framework, and this we can see in course books. It's what we call the comprehension approach, where the measure of achievement is given by the correct answers that students provide. The next great debate has been, what do we do in the classroom? Are we actually teaching skills, or are we actually testing skills? With the consensus that the comprehension approach focuses mostly on testing. And nowadays, the current trend is, how can we make this experience more authentic in order to better develop our students' both reading and listening skills? To answer one of your questions, it's not really about adapting the texts in terms of content, but maybe it's about adapting our mindset. And you'll always hear me asking, when in real life will your students need this? Or when in real life will your students use this? This shift in perspective from language as an object of study to language as a means to communicate and a means to exist in the outside world and interact. And interaction means both the ability to produce language, but also to recognize, decode, and comprehend language. So maybe the way moving forward is to adapt our tasks rather than to adapt our texts. Also, in terms of level of participation and engagement, we know this from the research that has been done into language systems, so things like grammar and vocabulary, that actually the level of participation increases when the students find both meaning, purpose, and context in their tasks. What does that mean exactly? It means that when students are interacting with one another, there is an outcome to the task that replicates something that happens in real life. For systems, it's basically the answer to the question, when do we use this grammar item in real life? In what context? In what situation? For skills, the question that Nick Peachy suggests is, what is an authentic task? What do we actually do when we listen and when we read? And once we make our tasks more purposeful and more contextualized, they become more meaningful because the students can see that they have a real life application. It's not just a classroom task that we do. And that will increase not only participation in the task, but also engagement on all different levels, cognitive and affective as well. And in the matter of one other question that you asked was, how can we encourage students to self-reflect? And I'm going to keep that question for last, as I want to show you exactly how we can make the students reflect and focus more explicitly, not only on the product of the listening and reading lesson, which is the text, but also on the process of what we do when we read and listen. The last step in our journey is going to be focusing explicitly on strategies. And we're going to go back to the start. Remember the strategies that you took notes about? Setting goals, reviewing achievement of goals, activating and using our prior knowledge, asking yourselves if you understand the text as you read. Which of these strategies did you use in doing the tasks, in reading the text that we did today, in reading our little mini extract. Love to hear from you in the chat box, please. So which of these strategies did you use? Remember at the beginning, I was saying in terms of, because a lot of you said three and four, we're looking at asking yourselves what you know about the topic and asking yourself if you understand as you read. A lot of work in coursebook is being done on activating prior knowledge. If you open any current generation coursebook, you will see that before the reading and before the listening, they usually have a speaking task. This is what we call a lead-in. The purpose of the lead-in is to set the context and activate prior knowledge that the students can then use to transition into the listening. But a very important step that is often overlooked is that how are you going, related to the question of how are you going to use that prior knowledge? It's not enough just to activate it. The students have to put it into practice. And that's what we do when we ask ourselves, is this something that I understand? We are remodeling our expectations about the text based on our prior knowledge, and we're trying to integrate the new information. Has been our journey so far. You reflected on your own use of reading strategies, which equates with something that we rarely do actually in reading and listening lessons, which is raising the students' awareness of what these strategies are. Most of the times, students, even good readers and good listeners, have a very skewed perception of what reading and listening is. They equate it with absolute comprehension. They equate it with more of a product approach. If you are good at reading, if you are good at listening, it means that you are able to comprehend everything about a text. But this doesn't take into consideration a more process approach. What makes us comprehend a text? How do we do it? Research here is ongoing because reading and listening are cognitive processes. So unfortunately, we can't peer into the students' brains to see what actually happens. But we do know that there are certain strategies that exist, and raising the students' awareness of these strategies, things like setting goals before reading, thinking of what you already know, reevaluating what you know as you read, these are strategies that we need to raise awareness of. This is why in a reading and a listening lesson, I like to start with a little bit of explicit reflection on the strategies that they might use in the lesson. And then I like to end the lesson and come full circle and get the students to reflect on the strategies that they identified at the beginning and see if anything has changed in terms of the frequency with which they use the strategy. The second step was to activate and make use of prior knowledge. One really easy activity that you can use is called the KWL, Know, Want, Learn. The reason why this activity is so versatile and useful is because it is materials free. And it also generates your comprehension questions. It generates student-centered material, student-centered questions, because the students can reflect on what they know. They can create the questions themselves. What do you want to know? So they're setting goals for themselves that don't come from the course book and don't come from the teacher. And then they can evaluate what knowledge they've acquired. What have you learned from this experience? So know, want, learn is a very versatile activity, materials free, very easy to implement both for reading tasks and for listening tasks. And finally, in our last step, you focused explicitly on strategies. You actually did this in my mini demonstration in two ways. You did more the reaction task that we did when you had to read the article and react according to your feelings about it. That is a more authentic type of task that we can set, both for listening and for reading. Because as we've seen from the article, it's important sometimes to adapt the task, make it more authentic, rather than adapting the text. Because again, you are answering that question. What do we do in real life when we read something? We have a reaction. We either agree, we either disagree, we either get attracted by the topic and we want to find out more things. And that is a more generative, authentic task because it generates interest, it generates discussion, and it is something that we actually do in real life. But the other way in which we can explicitly focus on strategies is through, as I've mentioned, reflection. And we've come now full circle. Reflection is important because students don't know what strategies they can use. Some of them intuitively say, well, I know the vocab, I know the grammar, but that is only one level of comprehension. As I've mentioned, strategies like setting goals, reviewing, predicting, all of these can be explicitly focused on through reflection tasks. There are two questions that you asked previously that I would like to address here. One is self-reflection. So I hope that I've given you some ideas on how students can reflect, not on the content of what they've learned, but also on the processes that they used. And a little bit of scaffolding, giving them a little bit of guidance onto what strategies they could have used is a way to address that. In a way, reflection tasks can be used as a diagnostic. So instead of a comprehension approach to reading and listening, we are moving more towards a diagnostic approach to reading and listening, where we diagnose at the beginning their awareness and their knowledge of strategies, whether these are listening or reading strategies, and then we see how far they've progressed, and we can address any further issues down the line. The second question that was asked quite a couple of times in the chat box was about choosing texts. How can we choose texts that spark curiosity? Well, there are a couple of ways to address this, and I'm going to focus on two ways. One, obviously, the decision lies with you because you know your students and you know their interests, you know their preferences, and you know what they like. So you, as the teacher, can make that decision for them. But since we are talking about shifting perspectives, one other way is to allow students to bring in materials. Elena, in the previous session, talked a lot about student autonomy, getting students to create questions, getting students to deal with generated materials that they themselves have created. The same principle can be applied to the choice of reading and listening tasks. You can allow the students to bring in the kind of materials, the kind of text that they are interested in. You can do this in two ways. One way, you can poll, you can decide on who's going to bring the materials next time. Another way is you can turn it into a project. You can turn it into a competition. Which text are we going to deal with in our next lesson? Try to convince each other to choose a particular text. So there are many ways in which you can turn this into a classroom activity. There's a lot of talk, and for many years, many years, we've talked of learner autonomy. Learner autonomy is not only about them taking responsibility for their own learning strategies, but also perhaps taking responsibility for their own learning materials. student-generated materials, student-generated tasks. Choice is very important. Sometimes it's okay to let go and give students the choice of texts. Now that we have revised some of the questions and some of the steps that we might want to keep in mind when doing reading and listening lessons, and then we've completed our journey that started with reflection and ended with a more explicit focus on strategies, I have one question for you. Try to describe our journey today in one word. What would be the word to describe the things that you have learned from this session in the last 45 minutes? If you have any questions or anything that you'd like me to address, please feel free to ask in the chat box. Also, for any questions and insights, I'm on social media as well, and I'm quite happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Like and subscribe.